Roberto.
Yeah, thank you so much to be here and hearing us. So thank you, Pascal, for the question. I think it seems like almost not here on this table, but also on the international field, that we are fighting as climate activists for who's the most vulnerable country, or who's the country that's being suffering more for the climate effects or loss and damage, etc. And I think it's really interesting because it leads us to different questions addressing the climate overshoot, which, I mean, it's understood that how do we face and how do we seek for solutions when we overpass 1.5 and we see the climate, climate emergency too. But in Mexico, we've been working in, not only Mexico, but mostly in Latin America, we've been working on the climate emergency, which is a completely different concept based more on legislation and how we prepare the legislation and constitution, the countries to respond and economic response, so they recognize and works aligned with the international finance, and we can get those funds to work and be resilient specifically. So yeah, based on the question, I think it depends, and I will really love to talk a little bit more about that multilateralism that you shared, that beautiful concept that was also mentioned at the inauguration. We are already seeing the effects of the climate emergency, but the countries are not doing the same at the very same level, and I think that's pretty obvious, and that also affects not only the activism that we do as the generation, how we can manage, to get the results or to seek for opportunities for the next generation, but also the upcoming years. We are just 7 years ahead of 2030, so I mean, that's really alarming, talking about global north, global south, and how to, close the gap, and yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there.
What's your take on these various options?
Thank you. I was waiting for this question. I think after a soft and a deep thought, the priority is peace. Last week I was in a conference in Mexico City, and there were amazing, tremendously activists from Latin America, from the global south. And there was this final reflection that said, we cannot get to 1.5, we cannot get and talk about decarbonization first if we don't talk about we as a community, as a human, and as really, connected to each other. And second of all, we cannot talk about compromises, multilateralism, polylateralism, collaboration, if we couldn't just stop the war. As simple as that. So my priority is peace. Every day I work with indigenous community in Tabasco, in Chiapas, in Mexico. Every day I also work with deputies, governors, senators on legislation, youth NGOs, and business, just as Coca-Cola and Nestle. And I think they all agree that we need peace, not only to coordinate the supply chain globally, to nature-based solutions, to reforestate, to have trees. And it's so complicated because conflict is also, if you go to history and a little bit of literature, the conflict is nature for humans. It's always there, conflict. But the conflict that we're facing right now is only a war conflict, but it's a conflict with nature, it's a conflict with biodiversity. It's a conflict with our oceans. We just passed the oceans 2 days ago, and we are not talking enough about the oceans and plastics, and we love to talk about decarbonization, but that conflict, and in the context of the Paris Peace Forum, I think we need to raise more awareness and to compromise. And it's so complicated for youth, not only because we are the most vulnerable ones, we are finding opportunities, education, jobs, but we're also fighting for human rights, for basic education. We're fighting to have that recognition. Also on June, on the LGBTQ Community Month, we keep fighting for basic human rights and recognition. So it's so hard in the deconstruction that our societies and the world is having right now. Those put a lot of challenges on the table, and how we're going to face it, I think it's only through peace. Peace is the key to solve all our problems, but we need to, to talk more about that. Then we can start talking about transition and how to make sure that there's literally no one left behind, and talk about the SDGs. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, it's really clear on the 17 goals. all the topics there. And yeah, trees. I think that's the best technology that we have right now, and we don't recognize it enough. Trees and reforestation. Yeah.
Good. See whether there are questions for you.
Thank you so much. Just what Charmaine and Anita were sharing, time goes so fast. Just 6 months ago, I also ran for the Senate in Mexico City. I was the youngest candidate, not only for Mexico, but in whole Latin America. And thinking on your question, if I wouldn't known, I'm not selected. They took me out of the campaign. Of course, they don't want a climate activist. But if I wouldn't known that they will do that 5 years ago, I would have done such a, to raise more awareness between youth and telling them, and this was supposed to be my last quote, but I think that the main focus that we need to realize is that just being passive and waiting for someone else, and this is your job, waiting for someone else to ask the questions, to do their activism or do the job for us, it's lacking us as the world, as a global community behind. That's why we are not on track of our global commitment, because we are waiting for someone else to do it. We are waiting for someone else to ask the right questions. So when the question is open, I want to see all hands raised, please, because I mean, we really need to move. We really need to act. And this is not just words. We really need to commit with our cause and say, what are we really willing to do? Because it's not an easy thing. It does have a deconstruction, as Shireen was saying. And I love that, because it's not only about, being born and raised in a certain part of the world, but also deconstructing yourself in this global citizenship or global identity that is happening right now, which is a unique opportunity to do climate activism in these new relationships. So yeah, I'm gonna close that there. If I wouldn't know right now, like 5 years ago, with a vision, that was before the pandemic. That was before the Ukraine and Russia. That was before Gaza. So I asked myself, I'm thinking, but I think this question is for you. Would it be worth it if 5 years ago, or 1 year before the pandemic, if we had made a huge campaign about the pangolin, have we stopped the COVID? Would you think the COVID-19 would have stopped if we had a huge campaign about the pangolin and biodiversity, etc.? I think we're having already those big campaigns about climate emergency, climate overshoot, climate change, human rights, and that's what I told you. You really need to move. If not, I think it's pretty clear what's going to happen. Science is really clear. The IPCC is really clear. I saw STEM, happening here, like a lot of, you have access to education, either it's for privilege or not, you have the access to all that information. Again, it's deconstructing, because it's really hard to take that information and say, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do it with all the social charge that lays on us. But definitely, before the pandemic and before the conflict, would it be worth it if we advocate for peace? That's the question. It's still being worth it if we advocate for peace. It's still being worth it if we advocate for climate change, because that's something we ask every year in COP, that we ask every 6 months in the Paris Peace Forum. It's still really hard, because we are not seeing a lot of results. Yes, we win the small battles in certain points, but if we don't mobilize, if we don't unite, if we don't do this working, acknowledge and know each other, it's not working. It's not fast enough, and it's not on track according to the compromises that we have. And again, science is really, really clear that after we pass 1.5, which I think we already have, but we are not facing the effect of the climate emergency globally, we will be having another response, and probably it will not be really nice, because I want to leave it there. I don't want to say.
Okay.
Bad prognostic.
Thanks, Roberto.
Finish. Yeah.
Conclusion.
Okay. Really quick. I love it. I love all the questions. Thank you for all the questions. A part of the work that I do is with UNIRIS and the University of Oxford, and my research line specifically for a culture and social reset, as I said, on constitution and how we're going to face that regulation and how it's changing, human rights perspective and how we measure human rights based on the climate emergency, the effects of desertification, all the climate effect. So it's really interesting. What I mentioned is because I think to have the bigger picture is to realize that first the education question, I love it. There's a beautiful conference that I recommend you all to watch. It's a UNESCO conference that it's on YouTube. It happened 4 months ago. It's available on YouTube. But there's other researchers from Harvard and MIT and Tsinghua University. And they're talking about the paradigm that is now with artificial intelligence. And there's one main question on the conference is, there's the need to still learning after AI? And the question is, and the researchers, maybe you think it's advanced or not, but it's no. We don't need to skip learning because we have access to all this information, etc. No, so it's like the question, do we need to keep buying encyclopedias after the internet? Did people keep buying encyclopedias? They didn't. So it's almost on the same page. To talk on social media, I love it. I'm an ambassador for TikTok in Latin America. There's a program of social media creators. They try to coordinate the biggest creators to talk about climate emergency. It didn't work the first generation, so now they're on the third generation. But the main topic on social media, and this is again a question for you, is that misinformation and I forgot the other word. Misinformation and, United Nations Secretary General says is the biggest challenge for climate action, but you see it extreme right, disinformation and misinformation on social media. So they're more coordinated than we are, so we need to actually take the social media platforms too. And yeah, there's so many questions maybe outside. Thank you.
Good. But between 30, 40, 50 of you, that would be the way forward. Thanks very much for your attendance, and thanks to our panelists.